terms of compassion, we'll look at our words here and I'll talk a little bit more about it. Compassion is caring deeply enough about the suffering of others to relieve it as much as possible, as though those suffering were our loving parents. And that's a very common Buddhist analogy, that every being was our mother or our father at one time. So we should care for them like that, and like those beings cared for us. It is directed towards ourselves, also a really important point, and towards our enemies and strangers, and ultimately to all living beings. So, as Rosalyn mentioned, when we start cutting through our own kind of attachments, or start penetrating this kind of thing that we think is there, that we see as an ego, and we start penetrating it and gaining this kind of wisdom that we're talking about, compassion does naturally arise. It does. One teacher I heard mention that, give this analogy of, if you're asleep, if you're awake, like a person is awake, and their friend, like Rosalyn here next to me, is asleep and she's having a nightmare. And I'm going, I wouldn't just go, oh yeah, look at Rosalyn's karma to have a nightmare. I'd be going, wake up. That's the kind of flowing that kind of happens as we develop wisdom. And one other, just a couple of points about compassion here. The other is that there's a Buddhist practice called the Four Immeasurables, and it's compassion, love, joy, and equanimity. And I wanted to make kind of a distinction here, because I think it's helpful that in that kind of a practice, love means wanting to make others happy, and compassion means wanting to take away their suffering. So we can kind of start to discern with our wisdom these two different positions, or different outflow of feeling. Compassion is the one that wants to take away their suffering. The other thing that's important, I think, when we think of spiritual healing, and it's talked a lot about in many of Nyingma lineage writings, is ease. So what we need to have to develop for ourselves is a deep ease of body, of language, and of mind. Because it's through ease that we can start to become aware of this kind of deeper presence that Tom mentioned earlier. And so it's just very important to develop. It also allows our own wisdom to come through, because some of the kind of mind chatter kind of calms down. So it's not just meditating like, now my mind has come, which is very important, but you can begin to just in your practice, wherever you are, to just notice developing a deep sense of ease. It can happen. You can do it anytime, anywhere. It's just something to bring the mind and attention back to. And I was noticing your wellness wheel that was up earlier on, and I was kind of looking at each of those and thinking that, wow, you can bring ease to, you just look at each of the sections of that wheel. You can bring ease and caring to each of those sections in your own life, and start to kind of penetrate some deeper meaning and some deeper feeling, some of the things that Tom was referring to. And I think that's the main points. We could go on for a month-long retreat, but for this time, I think that's what we have to offer, is these 4 points about compassion, and bringing it into your own life through the creation of ease, through noticing the suffering of others, through developing your own wisdom, and through the act of something like giving, like to this person in San Francisco that I had mentioned. The other kind of nice practice aid is Buddhist art. So there's a Buddhist thangka, meaning a Buddhist painting, called the Healing Buddha. And we're sitting in a Healing Buddha classroom, and there's a thangka on the back. Unfortunately, it's too far away. But if you take any Buddhist art that attracts you, that is that brings you to this view of peace, You don't have to know any of the symbolism. You don't have to know who this is and what they're holding in their hand and why there's something over their head. It just let it bring that presence of peace, and then wisdom will come and compassion will come.